Um, Good afternoon and welcome on to the books. Good afternoon. You notice that I'm wearing appropriate attire again? It's the little things that we care about here at Lunch with Books. If you have a cell phone, will you mute it, please? However you would choose to do that. I want to mention the fact that at the end of October, the holiday traditionally known as All Hallows Halloween, we're going to have another one of those interactive plays that we love so much. Orson Welles used to do them for the Mercury Theater, and we did War of the Worlds. Remember that? Big fun. And this time we're doing Dracula. So I'll be approaching some of you to read parts from Dracula, and others of you, anyone who attends, will be participating in terms of sound effects. And it will be a gala event. Do not miss. Now, next week on the 3rd of October, Ronald Lewis, who's a professor of history from WVU, will be back. His book is called Iron Artisans, Welsh Immigrants, and the American Age of Steel. And then on the 10th at noon, the Wheeling Poetry Series with Mark Harshman is back, and it's Jeff Worley, who was supposed to be here before. But had to cancel. He will be returning on the 10th. Our guest today is Cindy Hubbard, who's a lifelong Wheeling resident, who's always been an animal lover. Growing up, she always had a big family, a dog or two or three. She counts herself very lucky to grow up with what would be essentially a backyard. Maybe you have an opinion on this year thing. Maybe we should bring that up. And it was where she and her three sisters each had their first jobs. In her teens and 20s, Cindy taught tennis at camps under Obi Tennis Pro Fritz Schunk and taught skiing and ran Obi Ski School for several years. After briefly moving to Colorado in the 70s, Cindy worked in Denver during the week and taught skiing on the weekends. Upon returning to Wheeling, she co-ran a nonprofit canine rescue rehab and rehome organization called Noah's Ark. For 25 years, Cindy raised orphan fawns for 20 years in her barn when she lived in the country, and then wrote a book called The Pleasure of Their Company, a memoir of adventures in hand-raising orphan fawns. And she presented about that book here several years ago. Her love of elephants began in 1978 with her first trip to Kenya, occurring in 1999. Cindy just returned from her 5th trip to Kenya at the beginning of September, and she feels very fortunate to be able to take these trips to help these magnificent beasts. And I have adopted one of these beasts, and his name is Logo. Yeah, he looks just like me. There's Cindy Hubbard.
Thank you, Sean. Jambo and Karibu, which in Swahili means hello and welcome. I also want to say Asante Sana Sana, which in Swahili means thanks very much for coming to hear me speak about two of my favorite things in the world, elephants and the Sheldrick Wildlife Trust. Before I start, I'm going to say a quick hi to some friends in Kenya who are going to try and follow this on Facebook or YouTube. So Jambo Mwenda Rafiki, which means hello dear friends, to Angela Sheldrick, the CEO of the Sheldrick Wildlife Trust, Ken Naikuni, one of the top guides in Kenya and in high demand for safari goers at Sunworld Safaris, the best safari company in Kenya, and Joanne and Gabrielle, two of their wonderful agents, Edwin Lucici, the head keeper at the Nairobi Nursery, Amos Lekalo, who is one of the keepers at the Nairobi Nursery, Emmanuel Lucici, who's the assistant head keeper at Ithumba, and the head keeper at Ithumba, Benjamin, Aidan, the head keeper at Imani Springs, and Leslie Hall, not last but least, and then that. Last but not least, Leslie Hall, my sister Nancy's and my first and favorite camp counselor at Mara Bush Camp. So now we'll start with the real program. Before I share all the wondrous and wonderful things about elephants and how I came to love them, it's important to convey to you how very precarious is their existence. And one doesn't even have to love elephants to be stunned by the decrease in the numbers of elephants over the last 123 years. In 1900, there were approximately 10 million elephants roaming Africa. 80 years later, there were 1.3 million. That's a loss of 8 plus 8.7 million in 80 years. Since 1900, there's been a loss collectively of 8.5 million elephants. The reasons are threefold. Habitat loss from the increasing population of humans moving into and taking over elephants' trade routes, where they go for food and water. Human-wildlife conflict, which is a direct result of the habitat loss, where elephants wander onto villagers' lands and get into trouble with their crops and farmland. The third and worst cause of the decline in the population is poaching. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with the demand for ivory. The number one buyer of ivory in the world is China. And you've probably seen or know of the Chinese trinkets hand carved from ivory that they've been doing for hundreds of years. Want to take a guess what nation? The United States. Not anything to be proud of. And the largest buyers in the US are Florida, New York, Hawaii, and California. There have been bans on importing ivory, but there is a huge underground market. And there are huge loopholes in laws that have been made. One example, eBay about 5 years ago, after a census of the elephants across Africa came out, declared that they were going to no longer sell any ivory products. That lasted for 1 year, and they were back selling ivory. So the money is the issue there. For years, the Chinese were told by their government that the elephants were not killed for their tusks. They were only knocked out. And it's only been recently that they have learned the truth, that the elephants are indeed killed. They just don't die right away. The poachers use spears, poison arrows, poison spikes in the ground, snares like piano wire that incapacitate an elephant. And once it's incapacitated and goes down, then the poachers, and this is horrendous, but you all need to know this, poachers go in and begin hacking off the faces of these elephants while they're still alive. It's horrendous, I know. And we're going to switch to the more positive part of this, the Sheltered Wildlife Trust, in a minute. But I'm hopeful that this will speak to some of you to write congressmen, senators, representatives. There was a law in place in the US that banned any Americans going into anywhere in Africa to do hunting or to bring back any trophies. The former president lifted that ban so his sons could go to Africa and kill trophy animals like elephants, lions, and the like. And I think you all have gotten a lot of handouts, and take them home and do look them over, especially about the Sheltered Wildlife Trust, which is what we're going to talk about now. In 1978, I read an article in a magazine about a woman in Kenya named Daphne Sheldrake. Her husband had died. Are you all getting this? Is that better? Her husband had died the year before in 1977, and she began a trust in his name to carry on the work that he and she had been doing for 20-some years, and that was rescuing elephants that had been orphaned by poachers. So she wanted to continue that work. The article really grabbed my attention. I was just a few years out of college. I was in the working world, but I was in no position to send any significant donation to this woman in Kenya or her organization, the Trust. But I sent this Daphne Shelter $15 in cash. My father looked at me like it was crazy. He said, not only is that money not going to get to her, but you're never going to hear from her. 2 weeks later came a 2-page handwritten note from this Daphne Shelter thanking me for my donation, my $15. And as they say, she had me from that moment. And thus began one of the most unique and treasured friendships I've known, consisting, save 2 times of meeting Daphne in person, of letters between us that spanned 40 years. I'm talking handwritten. This is not email, this is handwritten letters back and forth. And the last one I received about 3 months before she died in 2018. This first letter from her was no perfunctory thanks for the donation, yada, yada, yada. No, it was full details of life in Kenya, life trying to raise orphan baby elephants, the Trust, which was at that point in its infancy, the trials and tribulations and often huge heartache of trying to raise an orphan baby elephant, especially trying to find a formula that a baby elephant system could tolerate. It took Daphne many, many years, much trial and error, and a lot of heartache. But she finally found the formula. Before her, no one had successfully hand-raised an infant elephant. Fast forward to 21 years later, when I turned 50, I treated myself to a trip to Kenya. I wrote Daphne and told her when I'd be there. She said that she was often away doing fundraising for the Trust, but she told me to come to the nursery, go to the public visit, and afterward to find a volunteer named Sally, who, if Daphne was away, would show me around the nursery. The day came, I went to the public visit, and afterward found this Sally, the volunteer, and she asked if I would follow her, so I did, and we went down a path, and then we went up on the veranda of the house. She knocked on the door and said, Daphne, it's Sally, and I have Cindy Hubbard with me. This all started because of $15. And out the door came Daphne Shelter, who greeted me as if we were old friends, which in a way we were, because by then we'd been corresponding on and off for 21 years. And one thing I want to add here, by this point, 1999, Daphne had become a real mover and shaker in the conservation world, a pioneer in so many aspects, a real dynamo, the first to figure out how to make a milk formula that a baby elephant system could tolerate. And she was recognized as such in the conservation world. And she and the Trust were recognized by then as the premier organization for rescuing, raising, rehabbing, and reintegrating back into the wild orphan baby elephants. What struck me then, and did every time I saw her, and still does to this day, is that when I first met her in 1999, when I saw her again in 2015 and 2017, she was the same grounded, humble person, despite all the accolades and praise. She had been not knighted, but Queen Elizabeth pronounced her a Dame of the British Order. And she still was this very, very humble person. So after a few minutes of small talk, she said she wanted to show me around the nursery. For the next hour and a half, I had a personal tour by Daphne of the facility she had designed and had built. And at that point, there were only 8 orphan babies and 8 stalls. She took me to each stall, introduced me to each baby, allowing me hands-on with each, as she told me its story as to how it ended up at the Nairobi nursery. And she left to go make a phone call and said to wander back down to her house in 15 minutes or so, which I did. She asked me to come in and help her carry out a tray with biscuits and tea. And for the next hour, we sat on her veranda, sipping and munching, chatting like old friends. She telling story after story of rescues, of sad losses, but of happier successes too. And she taught me then a great lesson of life, that when someone dies, you grieve, yes, but then you must turn the page and return to living, and that this was especially true and critical when dealing with fragile, orphaned baby elephants. As our visit wound down, she explained that she was leaving in the morning to do a fundraising tour across Canada, but she offered that I could come to the nursery for the next several days while I was still in Kenya, find this Sally afterwards, and she would hand me off to a keeper, and I could just hang there for the afternoon. And I just can't tell you how magical that was. It was just incredible. Daphne and David's daughter, Angela, who is now the current CEO, began working with Daphne 25 years ago and still is the CEO. And the two of them became a tag team tour de force for the trust and expanding its projects and missions. It has grown from the Nairobi nursery with 8 stalls to roughly 32 stalls, and the addition of 3 reintegration stations. Nursery babies graduate to one of these when it's their time, and the staff and Angela, the keepers, spend a lot of time reviewing each baby's progress and making this decision as to when it's ready to go to one of the reintegration units. Daphne often mentioned that their ultimate goal is to give the elephants their God-given right to a free, wild, and protected life, and that's the bottom line, the cornerstone of the Sheltered Wildlife Trust and its Orphans Project. Which brings me to one of the most unique things about the Sheltered Trust. That's their Orphans Project, where you can adopt a baby elephant for $50 for a year. And it's done securely and digitally online and through emails. You receive an adoption certificate, photos of your baby, monthly newsletters, at the end of which is a monthly original watercolor by Angela Shelbrick. When I saw her last year, I said, I don't know how you do this with all that you do, find time to do a watercolor, and she's a very good artist. $50 is a drop in the bucket compared to what it costs the trust to raise just one elephant. And it's roughly $1 million a year. Most babies are with the trust from whenever they arrive, which could be 6 months old up to 10 years. And right now, the trust has in its care 89 elephants. So you're looking at $89 million. But one good thing about the adoption program, I have a baby called Malkia. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of people around the globe that are also foster parents to the same elephant. So that helps to some degree. But it's a very fun and unique gift for a family member, friend, or for that person who is impossible to buy for a baby elephant. The odds are pretty good that they do not have one. So it's not only a great gift, but it's a great way to support this worthwhile organization. There are a vast number of other projects that the Trust undertakes. 2 million acres in Kenya are now under the Trust Conservation Management and Protection. And this is and will continue to be a boon for Kenya, its wildlife, and its flora and fauna. And included among these are saving habitats programs, planting trees, erecting beehive fencing, a novel and effective way of limiting human-wildlife conflict. And yes, these magnificent, huge, lumbering beasts, elephants, are afraid of bees. They also do outreach to native villages and communities, and they reimburse if elephants have strayed into croplands Sheldrick reimburses these communities and villages and then helps to change their thinking so that they will come on board to be protectors of the elephants. They also sponsor trips of Nairobi school children to the Nairobi nursery. And that's to begin grooming Kenya's next generations to take the mantle of protecting Kenya's beautiful but threatened wildlife. They also do water for wildlife. You may or may not have heard of the severe droughts in Kenya over the last few years. And Sheldrick has drilled 32 boreholes to get to water in various places around Kenya. And then they bought 8 water bouncers, which are like big water tank trucks. And they spend their days traveling between water troughs that the trust has built in various places in Kenya. There are also programs with boots on the ground, anti-poaching rangers with trained dogs. There are 8 fixed-wing aircraft and 2 helicopters who routinely do surveillance on the lookout for poachers or perpetrators of other illegal activities. Right now, for instance, there's a lot of activity of natives killing giraffes, zebras, wildebeest for bushmeat. 2 of the Sheldrick pilots are Daphne's and David's grandsons, Angela's sons, Teru and Roan. They're in their early 20s. I had the great good fortune to meet one of them, Teru, in 2017 at the Mud Wallow in Ithumba. At the time, Daphne was undergoing chemo, and I went over and introduced myself and explained how I'd come to know his grandmother. And this young man spoke so eloquently, perfect English, of how lucky he was to be part of not only such a family, but how he adored his grandmother Daphne, wished he'd known his grandfather David, and how fortunate he was to be able to be devoting his life and time to the trust. As I was telling about how I came to know his grandmother, how I was one of hundreds of thousands praying for her in the battle against breast cancer, I got a bit teary, and this young strapping fellow just pulled me into a sideways hug. And my sister at that time came over and took a photo that is one of my absolute favorites. The trust is often called to rescue and treat injured animals, elephants and others, out in the field, and they send teams wherever they're needed. In 2022, the trust veterinarians, in conjunction with the Kenya Wildlife Service, attended to nearly 3,000 injured animals, some with spears still in them, some with gunshots, and they tranquilize them in field. They perform whatever surgery or operation is necessary. They give them a reversal drug against the tranquilizer, and they send them on their way, and they monitor them. The trust teams also include videographers who then post these field operations on Facebook. So they're very transparent. Facebook's an excellent way to get to know the Sheldrick Wildlife Trust. It's really something that the Kenya Wildlife Service, when they receive a call about an injured animal, their first call is to the Sheldrick Trust in Nairobi. It's a great testament to their success. Elephants are extraordinary beings. They are by nature family-oriented, empathetic, compassionate, intelligent, intuitive, and especially devoted to the babies in the herd. The oldest female is the matriarch, and it is she who is the prime holder of their history and knowledge. And she passes this on to other family members in the herd. Elephants also mourn their dead. They hold a series of funeral rituals for their fallen loved ones. They'll observe a moment of silence. They'll cover the body with branches, and they'll even continue to visit the bones for years afterward. And I've seen pictures of elephants at the site where an elephant has died, and they'll pick up a bone and they'll carry it around. and it's as if they're feeling. You get a sense that they knew this elephant. The babies that come to the nursery have, for the most part, been terribly traumatized by whatever has taken their mother from them. Whether it's gunshot, whatever, their mother has fallen and has been brutally sliced up. And the babies take some time to get used to people. And this is where the keepers play such an important role. They are the most patient, caring, and experienced fellows to deal with the trauma that the babies have undergone. But with the keeper's patience, support, and love, the elephants are helped to move on and once again embrace life. I'm going to read just a couple parts of an article that Daphne wrote, and it's called Elephant Emotions. Why is it that most people feel such empathy for elephants, even if they have never had close contact with them? Is it because of their size, their quaint characteristics, or the fact that they are so incredibly endearing as babies, tripping over little wobbly trunks that seem to serve no other purpose than to get in the way? Or is it perhaps because elephants are human animals in terms of emotion, and in many other ways as well, encompassed by an invisible and mystical aura that reaches deep into the human soul in a mysterious way that defies human logic? I can vouch for that, for I have worked intimately with elephants for 55 plus years. My team and I have hand-reared over 150 orphan elephants, some from the day they were born. And I'm adding a note to this, that as of today, the Trust has raised 320 orphans, with 52 babies born to ex-orphans living in the wild. They have grandchildren. The shelter has grandchildren as well. Whilst it has not always been so, it is now accepted scientifically that elephants share with us many human traits. For instance, they have the same approximate span of life, and they develop at a parallel pace so that at any given age, a baby elephant duplicates a human of the same age. Their brain is 4 times the size of ours and convoluted, indicating that elephants can reason and think. It's also been proven that a part of the human brain responsible for memory is far more sophisticated than that of a human. I remember Daphne telling me that if an elephant offers you its trunk and you blow in it, that elephant will always remember you. And I've seen it in action. It is true. They also share with us a strong sense of family and a deep sense of death. Each elephant is a unique individual, just as we are. They can be happy or sad, placid by nature, or more volatile. They can be playfully mischievous, delighting in playing harmless pranks on other members of the herd. However, they are taught discipline from a very young age by their senior herd members. They know envy and jealousy, can throw tantrums and harbor grudges about a perceived injustice, just like humans. And just like human children, they can be competitive for rank and status among their peers. I have been privileged to live amongst elephants and other animals all my life, observing them in the wild and hand-rearing orphan young. But it's been the rearing of the infant, milk-dependent babies that has given me an in-depth insight into the elephant's psyche. Hand in hand with good times have come heartbreaks in abundance, but each elephant life saved has rewarded us richly with untold satisfaction. When rearing long-lived animals such as elephants, one must dig deep from inner reserves to find staying power, for it is a long-term assignment parallel to raising a human child. It took me 28 years, 28 long years, to perfect the milk formula and complicated husbandry, vital to success in terms of rearing the newborn elephants. And in the process, each one that died shredded my heart. To repeat part of what I just read, elephants have a mysterious perception that defies all human logic, able to foresee important events ahead of time. And the following story illustrates this perfectly, and it has to do with Daphne herself. Daphne got breast cancer in 2016, and she was doing chemotherapy in Nairobi, which has excellent doctors and hospitals. And at one point, she just was fed up. She was in between treatments, so she decided she wanted to go to her favorite place, which is Tsavo East National Park, and Ithumba. She told her daughter, and she said, "I do not want anyone to know I'm coming, and you are sworn to secrecy." And Angela Sheldrick said, "All right." So Angela arranged for a vehicle to pick Daphne up, a Sheldrick vehicle, took her to the smaller airport in Nairobi, and she took a flight to Ithumba, the airstrip there. And Daphne, Angela arranged for a driver to be waiting there for her. Angela had sworn the driver and the pilot to secrecy. And now we switch to the keepers at Ithumba. In particular, Benjamin, the head keeper. As he told it later, that morning began as normal, which is the orphans residing in the stockade get their milk bottles, and then they're let out of the stockades and they go to a common area where they receive lucerne pellets and alfalfa. Also coming to this area are ex-orphans and wild bulls and wild females, and that's a norm. They all come and mix and mingle. After some time, normally about 45 minutes, the orphans that live in the stockade would signal one another and they would start to head off to the bush. And this was not happening that morning, so Benjamin told his assistant keepers, "Well, they're having a lazy morning, let's just let them hang here for a little bit." A little bit went on and on and on, and he said to his keepers, "Let's try and encourage them to go out of the bush." And the elephants were just, he said, paying us no mind. So then the elephants, the orphans who lived in the stockade, the ex-orphans, some who had babies that had been wild-born, wild bulls and wild females, he said they did something that he's never seen any elephants do, and that is line the road that comes into this Ithumba reintegration unit. And after about 5 more minutes, Benjamin heard the sound of a motor vehicle. And it's totally threw him because he knew they didn't have any deliveries, no one was expected. And in another few minutes, around the bend came a Sheldrick vehicle with Daphne Sheldrick inside. And all these elephants knew. They knew ahead of time that she was coming, and no one at Ithumba, no human at Ithumba knew. So through this mysterious perception that defies all human logic, this ability to foresee important events ahead of time that Daphne described, they knew their collective matriarch, the one who had founded the organization that had rescued and saved them, who had perfected the milk formula, they knew this champion of theirs had come to see them. And not every elephant there had ever known Daphne, weren't raised by her, but since elephants telegraph messages to one another through rumbles or through the ground via their feet, and no, I don't understand how that works, but obviously the importance of the moment being awaited was transmitted by those elephants who knew Daphne to those who didn't. Benjamin has been with the trust and the head keeper at Ithumba for many, many years, and he said he's never, ever witnessed anything like it. If you all remember back in 2005, there was a horrible tsunami that hit Thailand. In residence was a group of 9 elephants, and they lived near one of the main tourist hotels. I think they offered rides. About 20 minutes before the first wave hit, the elephants, normally quiet and placid, became extremely agitated and unruly. In a desperate panic, they all began to climb a hill behind the hotel and start bellowing. Many people followed them up the hill and were saved, and then the waves hit. When the waves subsided a bit, the elephants charged down from the hill and began picking up children with their trunks and running them back up the hill to safety. When all the children were taken care of, they began the same journeys up and down the hill with adults. These elephants carried and rescued 42 people that day. Then they returned to the beach, carried up 4 dead bodies, 1 child. Once they had done all they could to help the humans, they joined their handlers and began to remove debris. So aside from the Nairobi nursery, there are 3 reintegration stations which in Tsavo National Park, which, by the way, is where David Sheldrake was assigned to become the first game warden of Tsavo East National Park. And he was to develop it for wildlife and with an eye toward tourism in the future. That's a whole other story, unless y'all want to save a couple extra hours, we don't have time. Reintegration stations are where the babies graduate to from the nursery. And the trust goes the extra mile to keep friends together. Friends at the nursery will get transferred to one of the reintegration stations together. Once the baby is at the reintegration station, it can take anywhere from 5 to 10 years before they feel ready and they make the decision to take themselves out into the wild. And it may be as subtle as they'll just sort of hang with some wild or elephants that come in and wander off, and then they'll disappear. Some have thought, I may have done this too early, and come back to the stockade, and they're letting. The third reintegration station is called Romani Springs. And it came about because of an elephant named Marera, who was just a baby when she arrived, and Daphne. When Marera arrived at the Nairobi nursery, she was in such a debilitated state that the veterinarians were saying the kindest thing is to euthanize her. But there was little hope for recovery. She had stepped on poison spikes, a particularly cruel method of poaching. The spikes had ravaged her feet, leaving her with deep, badly infected wounds. She also had a badly damaged hip. She couldn't walk or support herself. The keepers would end up being her legs, basically. As Angela related, her mom, Daphne, saw a glimmer of hope and said, and this is a quote, "This elephant has a lifespan of upwards of 60 years. Even if healing Marera takes a 2-year struggle, it is important we try, as she so wants to live." And that quote from Daphne has always struck me, because she knew in her heart and soul that this baby, so mutilated and injured by humans, also had a big heart and soul and a strong will to survive, live, and thrive. At that point, then, everyone began going way more than the extra mile to support Marera each step of the way, literally, physically, emotionally, voicing love and encouragement at every opportunity. And as Daphne thought about the Trust's at that time, current reintegration stations, she realized that even if Marera progressed, she would likely never be able to traverse a more rugged terrain at Ithumbo or the other reintegration station called Boy. So she knew that they needed to find some special place with easier terrain for handicapped elephants like Marera to get around. And soon after Marera's arrival at the nursery, Another orphan, Sanjay, arrived, also with severe injuries and disabilities. She and Marrera became, which carries on to this day. And this twosome confirmed to Daphne the need for a unique place for them and future disabled elephants. At just that time, a serendipitous opportunity presented itself. The Trust already had established a saving habitats program in the Kabwezi Forest, and it was already home to wild elephants, had food and water in abundance, and provided a wilderness where Marrera and Sanjay could not only get around, and much more easily than at the other stations, but could also truly thrive. Sheldrick was given the go-ahead to build a reintegration station, and thus was born in Monty Springs in 2014. Reminiscent of the movie Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. Sure enough, other physically compromised orphans began coming to the Trust, and the foundling herd of Amani Springs was born. From the beginning, Marrera excelled as a matriarch, the matriarch of Amani, and has been so ever since, with Sanjay as her right-hand girl. Marrera has since gone on to have her own wild-born baby, and I really suggest you go on the Sheldrick Wildlife Trust site and read her whole story, because it's quite a story. It would take too long to tell it to you here, but the circle of life continues there. So I have a couple suggestions. Go to the sheldrickwildlifetrust.org online, or if you're on Facebook, Sheldrick Wildlife Trust is on there, and you can learn a lot about it from its Facebook pages. Daphne also wrote a wonderful book called Love and Elephants, which is a terrific read. She wrote the whole thing. She had no ghostwriter helping her do this. As Angela Sheldrick, Daphne and David's daughter, said, the Trust is truly a labor of love, started a lifetime ago by two people, Angela's parents, who had a shared vision of conservation and the courage to pursue it. And now, supported by an incredible team and a global group of supporters, the legacy continues. Am I running across the article about Daphne and David and the Trust sending her $15 cash, getting that first letter from her, getting to travel to Kenya, has been and continues to be life-changing. It has opened up a whole new world to me that I love sharing with people. In fact, I have a whole group right here, part of two groups that I got to travel with this year and last year to Kenya. So my hope is that some of you might be inspired to check out the Sheldrick Wildlife Trust, become involved, maybe consider a donation, and even that some of you might become like me, a lover of Sheldrick. Last but not least, adopt a baby elephant. I guarantee it will be an experience like none you've ever had, and you'll be contributing to one of the major projects of the Trust. Let me say it again, Asante Sana Sana, which is Swahili for thank you for coming to listen. And I'll close with a Swahili toast, Maisha Marifu, which means here's long life to you, good health, and cheers. Concludes. There's more handouts up here. Please take them.
Does anyone have questions?
Oh,
I don't know if this is an appropriate question, but since you brought it up, I have been a little bit on the fence about holding these deer kills. I know what the DNR's argument is about keeping deer population at a sustainable level and allowing a certain amount of hunting in general. Whether or not it's really appropriate in a place like Oakland Park, I have a lot of questions about. I know, there's been a Freedom of Information Act, filed to get documents about all the reasoning behind this. But again, I feel like I'm just not informed enough to know whether this is a good idea, although it does seem odd to me to have people in tree stands in Oakland Park, shooting bows and arrows, and if that's really necessary. I know where we live, which is almost adjacent to Oakland, we had quite a large population of deer, but they didn't bother us, and it didn't seem like any were starving, so I don't think that there was an overpopulation from that standpoint. A few years ago, there was a disease transmitted by a biting fly that killed off a substantial percentage of the local herd. For a couple of weeks, the stench of death was just everywhere in our neighborhood. And now they're coming back, but they're not nearly as many as there were, say 5 or 10 years ago. So I'm having doubts about the necessity of this whole thing, and I don't know the politics, I don't know, what's going on, but I just wonder if you have an opinion or any thoughts.
I used to raise orphan fawns, and that took about 20 years, plus they used to come back to my place. One of the arguments I've seen online that Ogilvy is saying is that too many deer end up with disease and genetic mutations and car crashes. In one of my posts, I said you can kill 95% of the deer in the park, and you're not going to necessarily stop car crashes. And I've never seen, in my 25 years raising fawns, my almost 65 years living in the country, I've never seen a bunch of sick deer. So I'm against it. I just think it's horrendous. These deer were released from the deer pen. They're tame. A hunter doesn't need to be in a tree stand. He can walk right up. Mouse posted a photo of a friend of ours who we play tennis with. Posted a photo of a buck lying, I imagine, in the field where the observatory is. And as Mouse described it, he walked right up to him within 10 feet. That is no sport. And bow hunters, my experience seeing deer come, because I live in Mark II, just beyond you, and I can't tell you at least 15 deer that went through my place with partial arrows sticking out of various places, limping because they were shot in the leg, and they are doomed to die a horrendous, torturous death. And sepsis will set in, and it's just, I think it's a horrendous idea. That's just.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Yeah, okay.
And like how long in years or months should they get to be released to the bond?
I think, yes, you can keep adopting the same elephant. They may take themselves into the wild, but they'll still report. The keeper's diaries is a fascinating thing to read because they report on every elephant that comes to any of the sheltering places, the reintegration stations. As far as the milk when they stop, do you all remember? I'm going to say maybe 3 years, 2 years. What'd you say, Ann? Well, okay, let's say 4 or 5 years that they will keep feeding a bottle. And then when they go to a reintegration station, there are some that still may be on 1 bottle a day, not necessarily the 3 or 4 times a day. So they they streamline it depending on the needs of the particular elephant.
Do you have any idea what's in the formula?
I don't. I know there's no cow's milk because elephants cannot process fat. So there's no, and perhaps, I know if you go on Sheldrake Wildlife Trust, there's a place you can ask questions, or on Facebook, you can always pose that question, but I do not know what makes up the formula. But I know we've seen how they love it. They come trotting in from the bush and they're just anxious to get their bottles.
And so they're involved in multiple times a day.
Yes, when they first come to the nursery, they're fed on demand every 3 hours. Yeah. As they get older, they cut it back. In fact, some that we saw, they would substitute water. Like the bigger guys and girls, they substitute water and they make it plain they don't like the water, they want the milk still.
So then in the wild, doesn't matter, feed the baby for 4 years.
Well, I think anywhere between 2 and 4 years. Yeah.
Does she have more than one child that she would at a time?
I don't think so. Now, there are mothers that have twins. I've never had experience with seeing any, but there's a woman, Cynthia Moss, very famous, well-known, up in Amboseli, and she has posted pictures of a mother with twins. Normally, both twins don't make it, but often what happens is she'll have a baby, she'll be nursing it, and that baby will get to be 2 or 3 years old, and then she'll get pregnant, and then that baby, I don't know that it necessarily still nurses. I don't know for sure. But that would be another question to ask on Facebook at the Sheldrake Wildlife Trust place.
We saw several of them moving the babies away because they were
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Did you hear that? Okay.
It's by humans, then they're around you. More likely to be pushed because they're not afraid of a human, or they're
That's a really good question, and I don't honestly know, but they do such surveillance where they are released that I've not heard of any poachers getting through to any of Sheldrake's elephants. They've got, I forget how many teams of anti-poaching rangers with canines that are very adept, and they will post pictures of all the snares they've gotten, and they've posted pictures of poachers that they've caught.
each end of the fact of your situation. You call the building, everybody in this room, people, we call the building department commission. Brian Haley is a man and you contact this organization. So why don't we make it work? Everybody you're calling, you tip those scales. We need to start calling and really good family members. Call by.
Great idea.
The time is now. It's just terrible. We have to do something. One voice will make a difference. Do something.
Great suggestion. Great suggestion, Lincoln. Did you have a question? Oh, I'm sorry.
Anyone else? Let's thank Cindy again.
Oh. Thank you. One last comment about the deer. In one of the posts I did, and I think what you're saying, we may not be able to change everybody's mind, but one of the posts I put, I said, this is so un-Oakley, and unlike the Oakley I grew up with and loved and have been supportive. But I but anyway, thank you all again for coming.